Phil, thank you so much for joining us today at Digital Edge. It's a pleasure having you here. To start off with, I'd love to ask you, how do you kickstart an enterprise to innovate and experiment like a startup?
Well, if you look at the difference between enterprises and startups, they both typically start with a big vision, which is great, but the startup will then figure out how to execute small. They have finite resources, whereas enterprises, they typically match that big vision with big execution, and they want to spin up large projects and commit a lot of resources, which makes failure a much bigger impact. Whereas startups, if something is not working, their hypothesis does not work out, they're just cut bait. And so with enterprises, the key is to build capabilities that allow you to not have a lot of collateral damage from failed experiments. And so focusing on those capabilities, I used to give out a failure bonus to teams where I canceled their project. And that was to, one, encourage them to want to experiment more, but I also didn't pay it out until they had actually written a learning document on what the organization could take away from this small investment we had made.
Phil, when it comes to AI and machine learning, where are you seeing tangible business outcomes?
Yeah, well, it's actually one of the top two things that our AWS customers want to figure out how to build into their own business strategy. And you think about the most common ways that it's being adapted today. It's in the prediction of customer preferences or the delivery of personalized experiences. And what happens after that is actually the acceleration or quicker optimization of the new products and services that are being delivered through the continuous analysis of the data that's being generated. But the challenge for most companies is that it's not like building a regular customer application or enterprise application. It requires data scientists typically and lots of new skill sets that the organization typically hasn't employed. And one of the things that we're focused on is how do we make it more accessible to more enterprises to actually embed these predictive personalization capabilities. And that's why we offer services that to provide the data scientists deep level of learning and experimentation, but also things that everyday software engineers can use to build in that personalization and better customer experience.
Yeah, more human experience.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to culture, how would you recommend that enterprises invest in culture?
Yeah, what's really interesting about culture is that many people would argue that in their company's culture is their most valuable asset. But ironically, it's the one thing that money cannot buy. And if you look at the cultures that many consider to be thriving and growing, they have two characteristics. And one is that they're adaptable. And the second is that they have this innate focus on something, whether it's a purpose or customer. And that's actually how Amazon is organized around this customer obsession, and everything we do in our organization is focused on customer value. And so the way we invest in our culture is to develop mechanisms and processes that actually reinforce that, whether it's working backwards from the customer, where every new idea has to start with a press release from the customer's perspective, or our leadership principles that we use to hire, promote, and make decisions about new ideas.
Right. Can you talk to me more about the press release for the customer? What
Yeah.
do you mean by that?
Well, it's the press release. We call it the PR FAQ because there's also a frequently asked questions associated with it. But the press release is simply a one-page document at its core that is written as if a new product was being announced, and it's written without technical jargon or inside acronyms that are expected to be understood by a customer reading it. And that's how we start and socialize ideas. And the thing I really value about it is that whether you're the CEO of the company or a newly hired software development engineer, nobody circumvents the process. If you have a new idea, you'll say, why don't you write a press release and let's get started from there. And again, the key is that it's rooted in a customer problem or opportunity and a real benefit.
Yeah. Within a company like Amazon, how do they foster and harness innovation?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is goes back to what we call mechanisms. Some people call them processes, but there are these ways that we reinforce the aspects of our culture and learning that we think are important. And so the working backwards process is a key one, which is we're always, our roadmaps, 95% of what we build for customers comes straight from the customer, what they're telling us. And we learn that from meeting with customers. I personally meet with about 150 customers a year, one-on-one, and that to us, even though we're data-driven and use data to make a lot of our decisions, customer anecdotes and what they're telling us is really the key driver in what we want to do.